Namaste. Archetypes is a Jungian concept and a very fundamental concept for the Jungian school. It is one of those more talked and less understood concepts. I'm sure we would all be delighted to have a deeper and clear knowledge on the concept. We have with us to discuss the subject psychoanalysis consultant Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste. So we start with what the word archetype means.
Colloquially, there are three meanings of the word archetype. First meaning is typical, which is used
Hmm.
like this is a uh, archetypal South Indian restaurant, which means this is a very typical South Indian restaurant. The second meaning, colloquial meaning is representative of, which is like to say uh, he is an archetypal soldier, which means he is a very representative person as a soldier. He represents all the soldiers as they are. He is a very representative of this particular group. So we say he is an archetypal soldier or ideal symbolization of something. So we may say
Hmm.
he is a archetypal honest person. He is an archetypal guru, which means he is the best personification of honesty. He is the best personification of what it means to be a guru. So the best personification of. So colloquially, we use the word archetype in these three ways: typical, representative of, ideal symbolization of. You use
Okay.
this word archetype in a very different way. For Jung, these archetypes were psychological entities which populated the collective unconscious in his model of the mind. From a structural point of view, from a location point of view. So for Jung, archetypes were structural entities common to all humanity. And uh, these archetypes, according to Jung, were universal. Right? They were not products of a particular historical place, a particular historical time, or cultural
Hmm.
experiences of a group or individual experiences of somebody. They were collective,
Mhm.
universal, and eternal. They were like eternal constants of the human race. Now, Jung
Right.
also used the word archetype to mean uh, three different things. The first is what the so we come to the next point of view that once we put archetypes structurally located in the collective unconscious layer, which is above the self and below the personal unconscious in Jung's model of the mind, the next point comes up is that if structurally they are so located, then how do they
Hmm.
function and what is their nature? What are their specifics? So for Jung,
Hmm.
archetypes uh, relate to three different things. The first is our program of life. So archetypes relate to the natural human roles we all have to play in our lives. So we
Hmm.
all have to pass through the roles of being a child, a teenager, a young man, a person who has a career and who earns for the family and himself, and a wise old man, and finally we die. So we all
Hmm.
pass through these phases of life, and in each phase we have a role to play. So this is common to not only human beings but most living organisms on this planet. That most
Hmm.
living organisms pass through these phases of birth, childhood, some small teenage or a long teenage, as the case may be, species to species, young age,
Mhm.
old age, and death. So this is almost like a program of life on this planet for most species, and we
Hmm.
definitely are one of those species. So one meaning of the word archetype for Jung was the natural human roles we have to play in our program of life, which is child, teenager, young person, mature person, old person, and finally we die. So these are what give rise to the archetypes. So we all have an archetype of the child, the archetype of a teenager, the half young man, then the archetype of a hunter who goes out to hunt and get something for himself and his family. In modern day terms,
Hmm.
it is a career, but the
Hmm.
evolutionary archetype is of a hunter.
Right.
And then we have the old wise man, and then we die. So
Hmm.
this is a set of archetypes, and when we talk about hunter, the hunter itself, apart from the being the hunter, that very age, young age, one can do different professions. So one can become a healer, a magician, a warrior,
Hmm.
and all these archetypes will be acted out in that young age. Right? So these are what are the archetypes in terms of the natural human roles we have to play. So this is related to the very basic program of life we all have, that we will all be born, we will all be children, we will all be teenagers, we will be going out to do some career, and we will be old and we will die. This is the first
Right.
group of psychological entities which are embedded in our hardware, which we have to play
Hmm.
out in our program of life. So, the first meaning of the word, the first types of archetypes are those archetypes related to our natural human roles that we have to play across the program of life. The second
Right.
group of archetypes relates to the question of individuation. So when we say we
Hmm.
want to live out the program of life, if we ask a question, why
Hmm.
do you want to live out the program of life in a particular way? The answer is individuation. That the
Hmm.
purpose of human life is individuation. Now, related to
Hmm.
individuation, there are certain symbols. The symbols of triangle, the symbols of circle, the triangle turning into a circle, the mandalas that we see,
Hmm.
the yantras that we see, these are symbols
Hmm.
which are related to the journey of individuation. At times they
Hmm.
tell you uh, whether you are doing well or you are not doing well, whether you are moving from a triangle to a sphere or from a sphere you are undoing yourself into a more primitive form.
Hmm.
So these are symbols related to individuation. So the second group of archetypes relates to the symbols related to individuation. They are not related to the human roles we play, but as a result of the
Right.
way we play the roles, whether we are
Hmm.
proceeding rightly or not rightly on the journey of individuation.
Hmm.
So there are symbols. The second group of archetypal entities which are symbols related to individuation. Now,
Right.
as we go towards playing the role, the natural human roles of the child, the teenager, the young man, the hunter-gatherer, the old man, and then as we move across them, uh, what we
Right.
come across is this: that what we call desire works out through these archetypes,
Hmm. Okay.
and what we call the infinity of desire comes into play. That
Hmm.
if I want to live, if I am 25 years of age and I go out to pursue a career, in archetypal terms, I am playing out the hunter-gatherer. But
Hmm.
what kind
Right.
of hunter do I want to be? My desire is infinite, so I would not be content in killing the goat. I would have a fantasy propelled by my infinity of desire that I would shoot an
Hmm.
arrow and kill lion on the planet Jupiter.
Okay.
Now, naturally, this fantasy cannot
Right.
come true. So, when the infinity of desire tries to work through the archetypes, two things are realized. One,
Hmm.
our capabilities are limited,
Hmm.
and two, there are dangers in the environment. And we try
Okay.
our best to address both these issues, to increase our capabilities and to reduce the dangers in the environment. But we soon realize there are limits to which we can go. And therefore, this leads to frustration of desire and unresolved anxiety. And both of them have to be
Hmm.
addressed in some way. And this
Right.
gives rise
Right.
to a second category of uh, psychological entities, which you can call mythology or archetypes based upon your definition of what is mythology and what is archetypes. So, the
Right.
real primary archetypes are the universal constants of the human race, agnostic to historical times and individual experience. These are
Hmm.
archetype of the child, the yin and yang, the mother and father, the teenager, the hero, the young man, the hero, the hunter, the poet, the healer, the magician, the
Hmm.
warrior, the old wise man. These are universal archetypes, the real archetypes, along with the symbols of individuation, the symbol of triangle,
Okay.
the symbol of cross, the symbol of square, the symbol of spheric sphere, the mandalas and the yantras, which naturally emerge even to an uneducated, untutored person. So these are the first real basic archetypes. You can
Hmm.
either call only these as archetypes or you can call them as primary archetypes. And then
Okay.
when we try
Okay.
to live them out, we realize two things: the limits of our capability, the unaddressable anxiety in the environment or because of the environment, and the infinity of desire. And this leads to
Hmm.
creation of new products of imagination to fulfill our unfulfilled desires and to address our unaddressed anxieties. And that creates a new level of archetypal figures which are more cultural and more individual in nature than the primary archetypes which are agnostic to history and personal experience. So
Hmm.
this new layer comes up, and some people call them also as archetypes, and some people call them as mythological entities. But these
Hmm.
entities also come up. So second layer of entities come up, and they relate to the cultural myths of it may be Oedipus, it may be Narcissus, it may be Sisyphus, it may be Ganesha, it may be Kuber. So then those myths come out at the second layer. And these myths also are called, addressed as cultural archetypes by some people. And then we have the third layer of historical archetypes, where
Hmm.
people uh, juice up and spice up history with mythology and create archetypes and heroes and villains out of real historical figures who were not so
Hmm.
extreme heroes or so extreme villains. So
Right. Right.
these are mythologized historical figures, and they also become almost like cultural archetypes for a given society. So, this is how
Hmm.
you looked at the concept of archetypes. If you be very Puritan, I would personally feel that we should consider the first layer of the natural human archetypes which pertain
Hmm.
to the human roles either we are playing or somebody else is playing in society, the natural human
Right.
roles. And the symbols of individuation, they are the real archetypes. And I would put the other
Hmm.
two layers as mythology and not as archetypes. But some Jungians do address even those mythological entities as archetypal entities. So this is how
Right.
you looked at the word archetype, and one of the difficulties of Jung is he was not very precise in definitions.
Hmm.
He used to fantasize himself as old wise man of Kushnag. He used to
Okay.
call himself as old wise man of Kushnag, but I think that was more of a fantasy. I see in him
Mm-hmm.
more of a vagabond archetype rather than the archetype of an old wise man. He was like a man on a
Okay.
motorcycle in the world of ideas. So he did not have the
All right.
patience to really be with one idea and chisel out all the facets of that idea with clarity and with rigor
Mm-hmm.
of definition and elaboration. So he jumped from one idea to another and he wrote too much for somebody to really write clearly. So
Mm-hmm.
in his own writings also we don't find such very well uh, chiseled out sort of definitions. And this is how we come across the word archetypes, which is used in many different ways in this variety of writings. But to make matters clear, I would say the archetypes related to the natural human roles that all human beings of the species have to play in their program of life, and the symbols of individuation, they should be considered as archetypes. Rest of them should be seen as expressions of those archetypes in terms of mythology.
So basically, archetype being very unique to the Jungian school and world of psychology. And I really found it very helpful the way you described that this can be like a personified symbolic version of certain traits,
Yes.
and how you moved on to the discussion of where how the role theory and the different phases of life program comes into role play, and how we can distinguishly identify each role, and then the process of individuation and the primitive ideas when the language was not developed, so how that those people must have symbolified the versions of the archetypes.
Yeah,
Now
be- because
um,
one of
hmm,
the ideas there is that the collective unconscious is also a depository of uh, knowledge and experience of evolution of the human race.
right,
And this
right.
brings in two more ideas. One, transmission of experiences through genes.
Hmm.
And second idea it brings out is that it is like just as the entire blueprint of a tree is in a seed, similarly,
Right,
the entire blueprint of the society in a generic essential form is in our collective
hmm,
unconscious.
right.
And uh, this brings us to the argument of the philosophical argument of design versus the argument of complete human freedom or the argument of accident. That what we see in this
Right.
world outside is not because of only our free will, nor because of
Mm-hmm.
accidents, but there is a design behind
Mm-hmm.
it. And at human
Mm-hmm.
level, the design of program of life is seen in the collective unconscious, uh, and the operative units of the collective unconscious are the archetypes.
I think very well explained again the way you said that, the blueprint of the entire tree is there in the seed, and nowhere a human grows a horns on his head because the intelligence is working there. So does the concept of collective unconsciousness comes to in the major role play out here.
Yeah,
Now, why there is so much discussion around the concept of
can
archetypes?
I can I add
Yes,
something to it before I go to the next question?
yes,
Uh,
yes, please.
because what you said has triggered one more idea, and that is the
Okay.
idea of the human system being a system of a bounded range nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's a system
Okay.
of bounded range that
Mm-hmm.
uh, everything is within a range. Like if you look at blood pressure, it will be between zero to some value.
Right.
Maybe what is the maximum blood pressure a human body can take? Say 200,
Right.
300, 500, there will be some number.
Yes.
It's not going to be 1 billion. You won't have such a
Hmm.
big uh, blood pressure measuring instrument that you require electric
Hmm.
motor to pump it up, and the doctor goes up in a helicopter and sees by binocular what is the pressure and comes down
Right.
from the helicopter. That kind of system we don't have. It's a
Right,
bounded
right.
range phenomena. So whether we talk of
Hmm.
sugar or sugar levels or pressure levels or whatever, it's a finite range.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Hmm.
that again brings out the argument of design, that unless there is a
Yes.
design, we won't have
Hmm.
this kind of very well-defined bounded ranges within which all the human
Hmm.
phenomena take place at the biological level.
True, true. Yes. Actually, the design concept is just we would like to discuss more as we proceed with the interview and discussion today. I was asking this, that why is there so much discussion around the concept of archetype, yet so little clarity to everyone out here? You
It's
you
true.
talked about Jung being a little, not well defined, or he couldn't just stick to one idea and just explain it to an extent where there is a lot of acceptance. But still, in School of Psychology, archetype is just touched with the basic definitions and classifications, and just people move out of it. So why there is so little clarity about the concept?
It's a good question because it's true that this concept is more talked about but less understood.
Mm.
It's more like a something you drop words in the flavor of a coffee table conversation. I
Right.
think there are some reasons why that is so. First,
Mhm.
I think the idea per se is very interesting, enigmatic, and juicy because it involves a continent of fantasy, and that is very, very juicy. Reality often is
Mm.
boring, and we look at reality as a necessary evil, but fantasy is very interesting and juicy. And because this idea has
Mhm.
to deal with a lot of imagination and fantasy, it's a very juicy idea. One.
Mhm.
Two, I think uh, somewhere there is something in all of us which I call the intuitive perception of truth.
Right.
And when we hear something, we develop an intuitive perception whether that is right or wrong or maybe half right. And that may be even in the absence of information that we have.
Mhm.
And the concept of archetype is one such concept where the intuitive perception of truth that we all have tells us that this idea is not something that can be dismissed completely. Even
Hmm.
if we don't understand it fully, there is some truth in this idea, and if we persist, it will open the door to something deeper and something very valuable. And that intuitive
Hmm.
perception of truth does not allow us to move away from this idea, even if after being with this idea for so many years, we are not clear about it.
Right.
And I think that is something very good because it keeps us optimistic that someday we will realize the more profound understanding and a more valuable treasure as we go deeper into understanding this concept. So this is second. The third part is uh, Jung in his personal and intellectual life was more of a vagabond than of a wise old man. And that brings us back to the difficult thing that he is not the last person. I mean, he's not the first person he should read on himself. It's better
Mhm.
to read others on Jung and then go to Jung. One of the reasons being he's not a very precision-oriented scholar kind of person. He is a explorer on an overdose of steroids who is jumping from one idea to the other.
Right.
And this creates problems because the way he writes and uses words then is not very precise and consistent across all his writings. This is one
Mhm.
more reason
Mhm.
why the word archetypes is not clearly understood and still people engage with it. One more reason is people confuse because of the definitional lack of clarity. People confuse where does the archetype concept end and where does the personal mythology start and where does the cultural mythology start.
Right.
So these
Right.
definitional problems create yet another region of amorphousness, and this leads to
Mhm.
a situation where, like the words love and socialism, The word
Hmm.
archetype means everything to everybody, and nobody really knows what it really means.
Right.
So when words enter into such a territory, they are more abused than used. And the word archetypes is passing through a similar kind of journey that it means everything
Hmm.
to everybody, and no one really knows what it really means.
Right. So it's sometimes we feel that, like probably Jungians have used this classification for, categorizing different traits in human behavior and, uh, the way they would react and respond. So even in modern context, we see that, if we see just on basis like, okay, they are very creative people, these are very warm people, they are people who are very aggressive, so they do come from some notion of being some classification has to be there. So the concept though sounds very fantastical in nature, but there it has such deep understanding of so many various cultures, and that brings the next question: how did Jung discover the concept?
It's an interesting question, and there are 4 or 5 different ways how he discovered the concept. The first
Mm-hmm.
route to this concept was from his self exploration. His first hand
Okay.
encounter with deep seated psychological entities in himself when he was passing through his difficult phase, which he calls as Nekia, which started after his departure with Freud, his break from Freud. So the breaking away
Okay.
from Freud led to a very difficult part in his own life, difficult stage in his own life. He calls it Nekia. And in those deep encounters with himself, he found uh, encounters with uh, psychological entities, which he later on called as archetypes. So that was one route of encountering these psychological archetypes in particular forms, some
Okay.
archetypal forms,
Okay.
but the encounter with these entities was first one inside of him. The second
Mm-hmm.
route to the discovery was in the real life expressions of people who were schizophrenic. Because in those
Okay.
cases, the unconscious is exploding out, breaking free the boundaries of the ego.
True.
And there, when the unconscious is exploding out, the whole unconscious is out there in expression. And therefore,
Right.
in that expression of the unconscious of the schizophrenic and the psychotic, this
Mm.
was the second source where the similar kind of entities were found. The
Mm-hmm.
third uh, was in the dreams of normal people. That when
Mm.
you analyze dreams of the so-called normal and healthy individuals, you also encounter the same archetypal entities. And fourth was
Mm.
in literature and mythology of everyone on this planet, right from a modern city dweller to a tribe in the forests of Amazon. If you look at the literature and mythology of every group of human beings, you find these common entities. And therefore, from all these 4 sources, he realized that these psychological entities are present in the human mind, and these entities are history agnostic. These are
Mm.
eternal human constants. They are history agnostic, they are culture agnostic, and they are individual experience agnostic. They seem to be the fundamental components of the hardware of the human psychological system. So we are dealing
Mm.
with evolutionary components of a human system, which have nothing to do uh, in a ontological sense with
Mm-hmm.
uh, the human culture, human history, or human experience. Although in the process of evolution, they may be evolving themselves, or they may be evolving along with the historical experience of the race. We don't know the answer to those
Right.
questions, but we are definitely dealing with fundamental hardware components of the human psychological system, which are history, culture, and individual experience agnostic. And they are sort of
Right.
universal constants of the human race. So, this is how he looked at the concept of this is how he discovered from various different points the same concept of
Hmm.
archetypes. And then he used the concept to almost create the foundation to explain the whole of human nature.
All right. So if we see the diverse cultures and the backgrounds of the species itself, can we say that when you were elaborating the point that how he has considered the basic design and the traits, can we say that archetypes are universal in nature or they are individual?
Uh, they are both.
Okay.
In terms of their essential nature, they are universal. For example, you have a liver and I also have a liver in the body. But the two livers are not exactly the same. So a liver is present in all living human beings. But all living human beings, although they have a liver, everyone's liver is not exactly the same. So a
Exactly.
liver is
Mm.
present universally in all living human beings, and yet they are different. We all have
Hmm.
fingerprints, but the fingerprints are different. So we all have
Right.
iris, but the iris is different. So these
Hmm.
are entities which are simultaneously universal and individual at the same time. They are universal in the sense they are present in all human beings, and they are also all following a bounded range phenomena
Right.
in terms of their scope and intensity. But
Hmm.
within
Hmm.
that bounded range, they vary from individual to individual. And this bounded range is wide enough to almost create a, practically speaking, infinite variation. So here,
Right.
so archetypes are both universal and individual. For example, all of us would have a warrior archetype. All of us would have all
Hmm.
the generic archetypes. The basic
Hmm.
archetype all of us would have. But for some
Hmm.
people, the poet archetype, the artistic element in personality, will not be so strong and overpowering. Whereas in some
Right.
people, it may be overpowering who take to art as full-time profession.
Mm,
Similarly,
mm,
the warrior archetype is not necessarily so strong that we would end up in an army. It may be
mm.
a diluted, attenuated, sublimated warrior archetype of a lower intensity where we deflect the direction from a real literal war to a struggle in the business world or academic world or healing world. So we all have all the
Right.
archetypes, but the intensities are different. The combinations are different.
Mm.
So they are universal, universally present. They follow a bounded range phenomena for the species, and yet they vary from individual to individual. So they are universal and individual at the same time.
That makes us wonder that what are the components which bring in the certain archetypes being so dominant in certain, are they energies or are they like, I still wonder what it is. Does the concept start with Jung or does it have a history of evolution? Because we have seen so many transformations from the ancient man to what we are today, and yet we are talking about the archetype which has such primitive stages and yet being so applicable in current world also. So was it exclusive to Jung or it had certain history of evolution to it?
In terms of indirect appreciation and application, it has a very long history because
Okay.
it is inconceivable that any group of human beings living together for a long time would not see the program of life as a constant of human life. And therefore, it is natural that we would recognize the program of life and we would do our best to create conditions where the program of life is lived out as best as possible. In India, that took
Right.
the form of the four ashrams, the four stages of life,
Mm-hmm.
and how to live, what to do and not to do in each ashram of life.
Right, right.
To live the program of life as holistically and as integrally as possible. There was
Mm-hmm.
also an
Mm-hmm.
appreciation of indirect appreciation of the same thing by classifying people into people with predominant uh, Agni Dev, uh, the Jal Dev, Prithvi Dev, and so on. So there was
Right.
classification of people, and then taking a look at what medical problems or psychological problems they would have and how to heal them, or what professions they would choose and how to train them best for certain professions, how to create balance
Hmm.
when there's too much of fire or too much of water. So that
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
thinking
Hmm.
was there in ancient ages for a very, very long time. Classification of people, not using the word archetype, not using the word the collective unconscious, but indirect appreciation and application of that knowledge in some cultural, social, or personal mentoring form. When we come to recent times, uh, there was appreciation of what is called evolutionary templates. So right
Okay.
after the theory of evolution came in, some psychologists dabbled with the idea of evolutionary templates, and that was the kind of uh, cradle of what we today call as evolutionary psychology. So in
Hmm.
evolutionary psychology, there was talk of evolutionary templates, some templates distinctly human, some templates inherited from the animal origin of man. And Freud himself talked about uh, what called he called as archaic vestiges. And these archaic vestiges were very near to the evolutionary templates. And if you uh, turn them into a social language, they would come very near to archetypes. So this was a kind of a
Hmm.
historical background to the in the
Hmm.
psychological area, but no one did it as
Okay.
clearly as Jung did. So for that, I think
Okay.
it was a revolutionary idea for Jung and for all of us that Jung brought out this completely revolutionary idea by doing two things. One, conceptualizing collective unconscious. Two,
Hmm.
conceptualizing self, which coordinates the program of life through the collective unconscious, and
Hmm.
archetypes populating this habitat of
Hmm.
collective unconscious. So those things were
Right.
completely
Right.
new, and I think Jung deserves all the credit for that revolutionary idea by conceptualizing first archetype and then uh, putting those archetypes into his model of the mind, because that is where the root of everything is. Once you put something in the
Hmm.
model of the mind structurally, then functionality is going to manifest in some way. And once it manifests in the functioning of the mind, of all the types of functioning, some types of functioning will be related to pathogenesis and therefore the healing. So this linkage
Hmm.
of the model of the mind, the structural components of the model of the mind, the functioning of the mind, the pathogenesis, and therefore the route to healing, they are sort of aligned. One flows out of the other. The root there is the model of the mind and the structural components. And by putting archetypes as structural components in the model of the mind, you put these entities in a position where practically a large part of the science of psychology could be based upon these very fundamental entities. And uh,
Right.
these fundamental entities themselves were not elemental entities, they were macro entities. Like if you look at any piece of matter, you can look at atomic level, molecular level, and gross level. The gross level would be the articulated felt feelings, expressions, and behavior. But at the molecular level, you would have archetypes. What
Hmm.
the archetypes are constituted in themselves in atomic sense, that is a separate question. But we are dealing with the fundamental functional entities in terms of the archetypes. It's very much like if you are developing a new medicine, you go to the level of molecules, you don't go to the level of atoms. So the
Hmm.
molecules become the fundamental functional unit, the most elemental functional unit that you are considering. Not that there are not fundamental elementals. There are still more fundamental elementals, but the level at which you are engaging with those substance is at the molecular level, because that's the best place to engage. and we are capable of engaging only at that place uh, with regard to that substance. Similarly, archetype becomes the molecular level fundamental entities, which are the, in a functional sense, the most elemental entities we are engaging with. Although they in turn may be constituted of even more elemental entities, which we'll see as we go on with this interview, with our discussion. But the, the moment you put archetypes in the model of the mind, they became fundamental functional entities.
Right. So now we know that it's exclusively Jungian concept, the archetype, and the notion of having this kind of classification, which comes right from the human evolution or evolution of life altogether. But when we're talking about this program of life or existence of the species in a particular pattern, I wonder, is there something in the area of philosophy too that is related to this kind of concept of archetypes?
A very interesting question. In fact, if we go to the Greek philosophy, we see in
Hmm.
Plato the concept of Platonic
Hmm.
forms. And
Right.
this leads us to a very interesting area of discussion. It's good that you brought up this question. Uh, Plato talked about Platonic forms. Now, what are Platonic forms? Let us say there are two squares. A square made out of wood, which is 1 feet by 1 feet, and a square made out of iron, which is 4 feet by 4 feet. Now, materials are different, the sizes are different, but still you call both of them as squares, which means there's something common between two of them. They are both squares. So Plato says what is common between the two is the property of squareness, the geometrical form of a square, right? Where the length and the breadth
Right.
are equal. So whenever you have length and the
Equal.
breadth equal, you sense a squareness, and that
Hmm.
squareness is constant across all sizes of squares and all materials of which the squares are made.
Right.
So
Right.
Plato said that this basic elemental form of a square, the squareness, is a Platonic
Hmm.
form. That even if there was no
Right.
human being existing on earth, there still would be squares found on earth. And even if
Right.
there was no square found on the earth, let us say some animal destroys all the squares on the earth, still there would
Hmm.
be a property of squareness. The essential square form would still be there,
Hmm.
not in the physical manifestation, but as a potential possibility. This potential
Right.
possibility is what Plato said was the Platonic form of a square, which is manifested in the real world using material. But
Right.
in some way, although it is invisible to us, there is this potential form of a square which is a possibility on
Hmm.
Earth. It is a possibility
Hmm.
in the solar system and the rest of the galaxy. Similarly, all the geometric
Right.
forms, the basic geometric forms, are Platonic in nature. That even if you destroy all the triangles in this world, the possibility of a triangle still exists in this world. Anybody can create it at any point. So this Platonic forms, which is an essential form of anything that manifests in this world. So there is an essential
Hmm.
form, and that essential form of a square is manifest in this world either by nature or
Hmm.
by human doing in terms of various specifics with in various colors and flavors. So I can
Right.
make a square out of wood, you can make it out of iron, somebody will make out of gold, but we are able to make it because it's possible to make a square in this world. And therefore,
Right.
the
Right.
square in essential form is the Platonic form. So,
Hmm.
Platonic ideas, Platonic forms were conceptualized by Plato. That there are essentially a few elemental forms which are realized in this world, and then those forms combine to create other forms. Now, when we look
Right.
at archetypes, the reasoning is very parallel to this kind of reasoning. That
Right.
Essentially, there are a limited number of archetypes which work out in this world, and the events then
Hmm.
combine together to take various forms and experiences.
Hmm.
It's almost like saying there are three colors in this world: red, blue, and green. And all the colors we see actually are combinations of the three elemental colors. Similarly, there are a limited number of elemental archetypes, and they
Hmm.
activate and they lead us to action and events and feelings, and that in turn creates our whole psychological world. So just as the entire world
Hmm.
of color is created out of three elemental colors, the entire human world, psychological world, is created out of the functioning of a limited number of archetypes.
Hmm.
The difference between
Right.
Plato's Platonic forms and archetypes are very interesting. One,
Hmm.
Platonic forms uh, are static entities. They are above evolution. They are
Okay.
ahistorical. They are supra-historical. They don't
Hmm.
seek their uh, realization in real life.
Okay.
But the archetypes are not ahistorical and supra-evolutionary. The archetypes are dynamic
Hmm.
entities. They are not static entities like the Platonic forms.
Okay.
The
Hmm.
archetypes are
Hmm.
dynamic entities which seek their fulfillment, and they push us from behind to realize them, to
Hmm.
activate them, and to feel them, and to experience them. So, unlike the static Platonic form, the archetypes are
Hmm.
dynamic entities. Unlike the supra human Platonic
Hmm.
ideas and Platonic forms, these are not supra-human, these are human entities.
Right.
And
Right.
they participate in human life and possibly also in history over the evolution of the species. So
Hmm.
these are some of the ideas. There's one more idea that uh, are the archetypes having a kind of a historical temporality to them.
Hmm.
That and this is an idea that fascinates me because this leads to the a kind of a explanation of sociology evolving over history. And the
Okay.
idea there is, I think it was taken up by Sri Aurobindo, and
Okay.
he described the evolution of human society as the tribal society, the agrarian society, the archetypal
Hmm.
society, the individualized
Hmm.
society, and the
Hmm.
spiritual society. And in
Okay.
that sense, the significance of archetype in human life and human society is then a variable.
Hmm.
And when
Hmm.
we look at that kind of evolution of society over history and that kind of difference in human life across the temporality of history, we see
Hmm.
uh, the archetypal age as a distinct age in human history where the significance of archetypes was at its highest at personal level and at social level. But after that, you enter into an individualized age where we don't cater so much to the archetypes, and that creates its own problems. Where we have
Okay.
what we say the a mythology deprived world, a myth deprived world. And the myth
Hmm.
deprived world has its own problems of alienation, rootlessness, juicelessness, a very clinical, self oriented, and a depressed kind of living, a very lonely kind of living. So
Hmm.
that is where
Hmm.
the Western world today finds itself between the archetypal society and an individualized society. The Western world finds itself in an individualized society where the
Hmm.
archetypal world is no longer given significance. At the same time, the spiritual world has not yet begun completely. Now, when we look at
Right.
that kind of uh, temporal evolution of the archetypal layer of our nature over a period of
Hmm.
history, then the concept of archetypes takes a different turn altogether. Because then we are looking at archetypes also evolving apart from our biological evolution, and the archetypes increasing in significance and reducing in significance over a period of history. And today, I think, as we are between the archetypal and the spiritual society, one of the difficult things that we have to do and we have not done is to do mourning over the loss of the archetypal society and the Jews it had. And this ideally should have created a complete wave of art and literature, which unfortunately has not happened. And unless we
Mhm.
mourn through art and literature and culture the vanishing of the archetypal age, we will not be really free from the rootlessness, the burden, and uh, the sort of a techno-clinical depression, meaninglessness, and loneliness that this age has beset upon us. This idea is
Mhm.
not uncontested idea. Some people would believe that there is no temporality to archetypal layer. It's a human constant
Okay.
forever till the species goes
Mhm.
off. But if you put this
Mhm.
temporality to the archetypal layer, it induces a
Mhm.
dynamism in the concept of archetypes themselves. And
Right.
in Indian mythology, behind every force, we conceptualize a conscious being. And by
Hmm.
that token, there would be a conscious being behind each of the fundamental archetypes. And
Right.
once we realize that, how to bring that in to our
Mhm.
psychological life, our mythology,
Mhm.
culture, and healing, that creates a new opening for us to explore.
Right. Uh, Talking about archetype further, why is the concept of archetype so important in Jungian psychology? Like the moment we talk about Jungian school, the first thing that comes to all of us is, oh, okay, classification, archetypes, and then a collective unconscious. So why this concept? Of course, it is the unique one, but still, it is, it is just being emphasized over and over again. That's in that school.
If we take up any school of psychoanalysis or psychology, there are five main elements. The first is the model of the mind. Second, the
Mm,
functioning of the model of the mind. Third,
mm,
dream analysis. Fourth,
mm,
pathogenesis. And fifth, healing.
mm,
So these are very five basic elements that are most important elements of any school.
mm.
Now, if we look at the Jungian school, the concept of archetype is centrally significant at all the five levels. It is central to the model of the mind, central to the functioning of the mind, central to dream
Mm.
analysis, central to pathogenesis, central to healing. And this is where the significance of the concept comes in. That in all the five pillars on which any school really stands, this is like the reinforcement bars of all the five pillars. And that is why the concept is so central to the Jungian school, because it is at the center of the five pillars on which the school stands. The
All right.
difficulty is not many Jungians even know how efficiently to use this concept. So they may drop names, they may evoke the concept, but how to efficiently
Mm-hmm.
use this tool is reserved of a few gifted Jungian analysts.
All right. So, as you talk about that, it is applicable to all the five pillars of the working of the school. We really interested to know how does Jung place archetypes in his model of the mind?
In his model of the mind, Jung places archetypes in the layer of the collective unconscious. And this layer is above the self and below the layer of the personal unconscious. Now, uh, the interesting part is this the self and the collective unconscious, the contents of the collective unconscious, you can't experience directly. You find
Mm-hmm.
their representatives in your waking thoughts and dreams and fantasies, or in symptoms,
Okay.
but you can't
Hmm.
experience
Hmm.
directly. Whereas The personal conscious you can experience directly. The personal unconscious also you cannot experience directly except through sleeps and dreams and things of those types.
Hmm.
But an
Hmm.
interesting component comes here related to how we experience. Of course, we cannot directly experience, but even indirectly, when we experience the archetypes, what is the
Hmm.
experience like? And how is that experience of an archetype different from any other normal experience? Say, for example, I see a magic show in the afternoon, and at night I have dream of a magician.
Hmm.
And it is by and large because of the day residue of what I saw. And let us say,
Right.
I have not seen a magician, I have not seen a magic show for 10 years, and suddenly one day I have a dream of a magician.
Hmm.
So when I see a magician in the dream,
Hmm.
is that magician in my dream literally representing some magician, or is it representing the archetype of a magician?
Hmm. Hmm.
So when is the archetypal figure, when is the figure that you see in the dreams a really archetypal figure, or is it just a recollection or
Hmm.
creation by the dream process of something there
Hmm.
out in the real world? And Jung puts
Hmm.
two criteria to differentiate an archetypal figure from a non-archetypal figure that we
Acha.
experience in
Okay.
our waking consciousness or dreams. And he says the two
Hmm.
criteria are the otherness and luminosity.
Okay.
So when you see a warrior in the dream, but you see him as a very normal warrior, you may just be dreaming of something you have seen or something you have imagined. It
Hmm.
may come
Hmm.
from the layer of the personal unconscious, not necessarily from the
Hmm.
layer of collective unconscious.
Right. Right.
But when you see a warrior in the dream and you feel two
Hmm.
things about that warrior, the otherness, as though he belongs to a different world, as though he is
Hmm.
not you. There's something very different about him.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
luminosity. There is a sort of a halo around him. There's sort of
Hmm.
something luminous about him. Not necessarily
Hmm.
literally a halo, but you feel a
Hmm.
distinct kind of light, luminosity
Hmm. Hmm.
associated with that particular character. So
Right.
when we have
Right.
the feelings of otherness and luminosity, we are encountering
Hmm.
archetypal material. Now,
Okay.
this brings to
Okay.
us a very interesting concept of how we experience parts of ourselves as our own and not as our own.
Right. Right.
Because,
In fact, that was the question got triggered in me.
because this creates a question of what is us and what is the
Hmm.
other within ourselves. So
Right.
it is
Right.
not the otherness outside, it is the otherness inside.
Hmm.
That we don't
Hmm.
feel all parts of us as equally ourselves. We feel different parts of us very differently. And this brings in
Hmm.
the concept of otherness inside of us, the gradations of otherness inside of us. And here it's a
Right.
very strange situation because we feel that on one hand, the archetypal entities are experienced as the other and luminous. And at
Hmm.
the first sight, it appears as though the other
Hmm.
non-archetypal entities inside of us, they are more familiar and more like us. But the more
Hmm.
we delve upon the archetypal entities, we undergo a change and we realize that they are actually more us than our conscious and personal unconscious elements, which till then we thought were more like us.
Right.
And
Right.
this brings in the concept. Heidegger uses the word our own most.
Hmm.
And when we look at deeply enough into the archetypal entities, we realize they are really our own most. And the scale changes. And once we are deeply engaged with the archetypal entities, we feel they are more of our own most than our conscious mind and our contents of our personal unconscious. And this creates very difficult metaphysical debates on is are we feeling the contents of the collective unconscious, the archetypes as our own most? What would happen at the level of the self if we were to really engage very deeply with the level of the self? When we
Mm.
feel that, we would still feel almost, or as the mystics say, we would have an oceanic experience where the self experience of the self would lead us from a personal to a transpersonal experience, which few people have reported.
Right.
We don't know what kind of transpersonal experience was that, whether it was a deep dive into the experience of the self-representing elements or an oceanic experience achieved through a very different course having nothing to do with what we are discussing right now. But it's an interesting area to
Mm.
explore.
Just the way the term archetype is mystical and fascinating, so is this discussion turning, Mr. Vaidya. Um, as you talk about level of self, I just wonder, like, how does Jung look at the pathology and healing factoring in the concept of archetype? It sounds more of a spiritual transformational journey on the point of archetypes, but pathology and healing, and you just mentioned that the five pillars have the same common base of archetypes. So how would you connect that?
Jung has a very positive view of human nature, and every psychic activity, therefore, is a goal-oriented activity. Jung once saw a neurotic and he said, "Thank God he became neurotic." Because if he had not developed the disease, he would not have taken the inward journey and reached the roots of himself. He would have led a very superficial life. So
Right.
sickness, in that sort of sense, is a kind of a good turn in the inner journey.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
therefore, Jung looks at symptoms more as consequences arising out of frustration of the process of individuation. So it is the process of
Right.
individuation which is going on through the
Hmm.
program of life. So in that generic
Okay.
program of life, there is a specific program of individuation going in, the process of individuation. And because of constitutional difficulties or environmental difficulties or past experiences, when this process of individuation is frustrated, you get into symptoms. And the symptoms always have a story to tell. The story
Does
of the
that mean
symptom,
that pathology, which he's talking about, can be the conflict of initiation of the individuation?
it may be initiation, it may be somewhere in between, but there is definitely a frustration
Okay.
of the process. It may be related
Okay.
to,
Okay.
as you said, initiation in that sense.
Hmm.
It may be that in archetypal terms, certain archetype could not be activated at the right time,
Right.
or
Right.
certain archetype was overactivated and not deactivated at the right time, or
Hmm.
it could
Hmm.
not be held
Hmm.
at adequate levels of activation for the duration necessary. In either of
Right.
the
Right.
cases, because of constitutional, environmental, or past experience difficulties, the process of
Mm-hmm.
individuation is not able to proceed. And
Okay.
therefore, that results in some sort of symptom. So the pathogenesis is rooted in frustration of the process of individuation. And that process,
Right.
if it is restarted, that constitutes the process of healing.
Hmm.
Now, this uh, does not mean that you don't have to look at the split or the Oedipus, because in reality, as you proceed even through the Jungian healing, you will see
Hmm.
discoveries of
Hmm.
Freud and Klein and everyone else coming out in the process, and they have to be tackled. The way you
Hmm.
tackle it may be different, but they definitely have to be tackled. And in some cases, you may have to bring in those very schools and their tools for a temporary period of time to tackle that healing and then move again back to the Jungian path.
Mhm.
So this is how Jung looked at it. But essentially, he looked at the whole process as basically a frustration of the process of individuation and restarting of the process of individuation in the safe and enlightened space of therapy.
So does that mean that healing out here can be the probability of being in harmony with the best of the archetype designed for that individual?
Yes, yes. It is, it is,
Okay.
it is the harmony at the archetypal level, which is at the root
Hmm.
of Jungian
Hmm.
healing and well-being. Just as for a
Right.
Kleinian,
Hmm.
the internalization of a good, reliable, stable object is at the root
Hmm.
of good health. And one thing common between Jung and Kohut is interesting. Both of them uh, stress upon the process, the natural process being frustrated, leading to a
Hmm.
problem, and that frustrated process to be restarted so that the system can on its own move on the right path towards healing. So
Sounds
that,
like a pre-programmed version
yeah,
of it,
yeah.
of a
So
life.
yeah. So looking
Hmm.
at this pathogenesis as frustration of some natural process and healing
Hmm.
to restart the natural process so that it can go on the path of healing. So these concepts of the frustration of a developmental process, a natural developmental process, and restarting of that natural developmental process in therapy. I think they are very interesting
Hmm.
commonalities between both Jung and Kohut.
Indeed. Mr. Vedya, what are the issues you believe remain unresolved with the concept of archetypes?
The first is the definition because it means everything to
Mhm.
everybody and no one knows what it means. That is first. The second
Exactly.
is
Hmm.
the elemental constitution of the archetype, the manufacturing
Mhm.
process of the archetype. Are we born with fully created archetypes, or the archetype in essence is there and somehow it takes the shape in experience or over a period of time? It may be genetically programmed chronological time, but the hunter archetype, for example, or the warrior archetype, right? Do we have the whole warrior archetype by birth, or there is a potential? And when we look at, for example, the warrior archetype, we have an idea of what a warrior is. Not one idea, 10, 15 different thoughts about what a warrior is and what feelings it evokes. So there are elemental constituents of that hunter archetype. So when we go into the manufacturing of the archetype, how, what elemental constituents constitute an archetype and how those elemental constituents come together. That is what I call the manufacturing process of the archetype. I think we need some clarity on that part. I believe
Mhm.
that genetically
Mhm.
we are programmed to manufacture the archetype, and this manufacturing process can be understood by resorting to the ancient Indian model of the mind, which goes into chakras and desires, and then
Mm.
taking in the concepts of life energy, karma, femininity, masculinity, and affinity.
Right.
Once you bring in these kind of
Hmm.
concepts, you can explain the manufacturing of the archetypes. So it may be that, let us say, hypothetically speaking, say 2 weeks from birth, hypothetically speaking, if
Hmm.
the layer of
Hmm.
archetype is to be created, then
Hmm.
instinctively the system would collect these constituents in a particular way and create that archetypal layer. So
Right.
the first is the definition, second is the manufacturing, third is
Hmm.
whether it is possible to have some open space in the layer of archetypes. If the self
Hmm.
wants to communicate with the conscious, has it always to go through the archetypes, or can there be open spaces? I believe open spaces can be there, and in my model I have put those open spaces. So the third, the fourth is uh, uh, a very clear uh, relationship between archetype and pathology. At present, we
Hmm.
don't have a very solidly clear relationship. We have sort of understood relationships at the clinical level, but we don't have a very rigorous linkage between the two. So that is your part, and what to do with it, how to use it for healing, and how to use it for social purposes, and how to use it for self development. I think these are the
Right,
areas
right,
which require a lot of clarity, both from Jungians and people from outside.
right. With regard to application from
Right.
based individual to individual. So, Mr. Vedya, like when we talk about the pathology and we talk about the healing part, how can we just not talk about the effect being generated? As in School of Psychoanalysis, we emphasize a lot about effect being generated, effect being suppressed. So, how is effect related to archetype?
Uh, there are some difficulties here in the way the concept is understood. Because
Okay.
if you look into the manufacturing process of an archetype, the inquiry will be what we call in philosophy as epistemology. So if you look at
Mm,
the epistemological process, the manufacturing
mm,
process of an archetype, you will
mm.
see idea and affect and energy, all the three are involved in that process of manufacturing the archetype.
True.
Now,
As we talk about the components.
yes. So the confusion here is people confuse between the archetype coming into existence for the first time, its first
Hmm.
auto activation, and
Right.
its activation from presence of an outside object or from a fantasy from inside, because these three are different kinds of activations.
Right.
First time an archetype comes into existence, there is a sort of an auto
Hmm.
activation.
Hmm.
And then we have second kind of activation where a object outside activates it. So a motherly figure comes in front of me, and the mother and child archetype in me are activated.
Is it like realization and internalization of?
It may lead to internalization, it may not lead to, it is a possibility.
Okay.
It is a possibility that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
internalization may happen. Now,
Okay.
the when object is outside and the archetype activates, the arousal of
Hmm.
affect is due to the archetypal activation in the Jungian terms. So the
Okay.
relationship between the archetype and affect there is that the presence of an
Hmm.
object activates an archetype, and the activation of archetype arouses the affect. So the affect there is a consequence.
Right.
The affect is a
Okay. Okay.
consequence of the arousing of the activation of the archetype. But the
Or the
second situation,
infinite desire you talked about. Can
yeah,
that be the effect as well?
yeah, that would be a second way in which affect can be aroused, because
Hmm.
we look at three situations. Situation one, an object outside
Hmm.
appears, archetype is activated, affect is aroused. Situation two,
Hmm.
there is desire inside leading to activation of some object inside, and that object
Hmm.
in turn becomes like the object outside and activates the archetype. So the
Right.
object, instead of
Right.
being outside, now is inside, and the object is
Hmm.
activated because of activation of a desire, and that object in
Hmm.
turn activates the archetype, and the archetype activates a affect. There is a third situation.
Right.
I am
Hmm.
experiencing something, and in the course of that, when one archetype is being experienced, the effects are generated, and there is some associational linkage because of which another archetype is activated. So in this case, effect generated out of one archetypal activation activates another archetype.
Right.
So I go to some place to meet a friend, and some archetype is activated in me. and we have a cup of tea, and that brings me to some other memories, and other archetype is
Hmm.
activated.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there, what happens is there is an ongoing experience because of archetype one, and in that ongoing experience, some affect is generated, which in turn triggers memories, and those memories in
Hmm.
turn trigger some other archetype. So there,
Hmm.
the affect evokes the archetype, not the other way around.
So
And
from the
then,
entire reservoir, the effect is generated.
yeah, so it's a two-way traffic there. Second way it's coming in.
Hmm. Hmm.
There the affect is arousing in
Right.
archetype. So the first
Hmm.
archetype may have been aroused by an object. After the arousal, a series of affects were felt, and one of those affects, by the law of association, gets
Right.
associated to some other memory, and that in turn evokes another archetype. So this is the second way, and third way, sorry. And then we have this whole situation of uh, what I call pure affect, which is very difficult for uh, Kleinians and even Jungians, the classical Jungians, to accept that there can be a situation of pure affect. Pure affect would mean that there is just pure affect without any object or without any archetypal activation. And in my own
Okay.
explorations, I have found it is possible to experience pure affect. The difficulty is these are rare experiences, and Freud and Klein did have these experiences, but they did not have it long enough to really be sure about them and theorize about them. Klein did talk
Okay.
about the pure death instinct coming up, and we have to deflect it onto an object to save ourselves.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
she could not conceptualize a pure affect which is not even coming up towards us. Towards us is also still, we are still an object. But
Still an object.
in my own explorations,
We
I
are
have found,
dissolved as an
yeah. So, but in
object.
my own explorations, I have found it is possible to experience pure affect. There are also are
Hmm.
exceptions of the oceanic states. The mystics
Hmm. Hmm.
experience oceanic states where it is a object free state, archetype free state, but still you have some feeling. Now, whether you call that feeling affect or not, that will go into definition of affect. But by classical definition,
Right.
you still say there is some feeling. And in my
Hmm.
heat model, I differentiate between a fundamental feel and a feeling. A fundamental feel
Right.
and awareness of our pure existence is a very different sort of a feel compared to a feeling of happiness or sadness. The feel of existence is a different feel compared to any affect of happiness or sadness, but that you feel only in a state of pure awareness. So
Right.
these are the labyrinths, so to speak, of the relationship between an archetype and an affect. And one more point is the affect which is involved, blocked in the archetypal structure itself.
Itself.
That when we
Right.
say a hunter archetype, one way to visualize is that it is devoid of any affect. When it activates, some affect comes into it. A second way
Hmm. Hmm.
visualize it, that it is actually a constituent of idea, affect, and energy, which
Okay.
tries to realize itself. If that is the conceptualization, there would be idea, affect, and energy blocked within that archetype itself. So that's a separate way of conceptualizing the affect inside of archetype, which is very different from the affect which the archetype activation evokes, or the affect evoked by some other archetype, which in turn evokes this archetype. Or the last point was of pure affect, right, which is unrelated to archetypes or to ideas or to objects. So this is a complicated maze of the permutations and combinations.
But the way you are actually explaining, it's actually very relatable to the topic today. and it goes in with the basic concepts of archetypes so well. Thank you so much for that. You talked about ideas and energy, so we would like to discuss that. How are ideas related to archetypes?
Uh, Continuing our last answer, if we transpose our last answer uh, in the realm of discussion with idea, there are ideas inside the archetype. There are ideas the activation of archetype evokes, and there are ideas in the outside world which evoke a particular archetype. So again, we have three different ways the relationship is: idea inside of archetype, ideas archetype evokes, ideas outside that evoke an archetype, and ideas which are independent of archetypes, which means there is a way of thinking, there is a possibility of experiencing thinking in a way which is independent of activation of any archetype. Right? You can say the archetype of seeking knowledge, or the guru archetype, or the student archetype is active. I would say yes, that can be seen. But
So can we say that it has to do with the pattern of the ideas, what you're talking about?
uh, there are two different ways in which we experience thinking.
Mm-hmm.
There is a state where we are driven by curiosity, by our ambitions.
Right.
And there is a state where dispassionate, unmotivated thinking happens. Now, that
Okay.
dispassionate,
Okay.
unmotivated thinking is very rare, it's not normal, it's exceptional.
Mm, mm,
But
mm.
if we have to paint the whole canvas, we have to take into account exceptions also. So in general, we will say that there is idea blocked inside of the uh, archetype. There are ideas evoked by the archetype. There are ideas which evoke archetypes, and there are ideas which are free from this whole world of archetypes into the free world of thoughts into themselves. So these are some of the things, and from a healing standpoint, ideas which can be used to more activate or deactivate an archetype would be very useful ideas from a point of view of healing. It would almost be a cognitive therapy for an archetypal problem.
Right. And when we talk about the components, is the component of energy missing in the discussion of archetypes? You talked about it. We are
Yeah,
not missing. You talked about it, but still the concept is raw to me.
yeah, it's completely missing because uh, the difficulty with the entire Western psychoanalytic uh, community has been to stop at the concept of life energy. So Freud stopped at libido, Jung stopped at life energy, and others would stop at affect. But we would not take the next step because it will take you straight into the Eastern system of yoga and tantra. Because
Right.
then you get into the situation that if there is life energy, the next question is, does it flow amorphously, or is there a circulatory system of life energy, just as you have a circulatory system of blood? And then you can take the same logic to thoughts and emotions. That are thoughts and emotions amorphously and disjointedly arising entities going and coming up and vanishing? Or is there some sort of a circulatory system or regulatory system for them? Can we trace them from genesis to their rise to their demise? So that kind of inquiry most people have not done, mostly out of fear of being robbed of this title of a liberal scientific intellectual. And that is a very unfortunate thing, that between political correctness and truth, we should be with the truth. But it's not easy to do it. And this has the limited psychoanalysis and almost entirely the Western psychotherapy. Now, this energy component is very important because uh, when we look at the human system from a Eastern standpoint, right, we just don't stop at thought and affect. We look at the physical body, the energy body, the emotional body, the thought body, the karmic body, the yin and yang, and before that, the self or the soul. So, energy in that conceptualization becomes a very important uh, element. In fact, it is the powering element. The energy, in fact, is the powering mechanism because uh, when we say catharsis and we say the
Hmm.
emotion is released, the
Hmm.
ideational component of the emotion comes out and energy component is fully felt with a particular flavor of the emotion.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
when we look at the Eastern ways of healing, which is Reiki, pranic healing, the yogic healing, in the West, Wilhelm Reich did this whole idea of massage and rolfing to
Hmm.
bring out energy and latent complexes in the system in the body.
Right.
If we look at the energy work of recently of Stanislav Graf and
Hmm.
many other schools which are coming up with different exercises in the energy area, uh,
Hmm.
energy is a very important component of the psychic system, and therefore it would also be a very important concept component of either the structure of the archetypes or the functioning of the archetypes or both. But this energy component is completely missing. And it might be that when we say certain archetype is more powerful or less powerful, we may be referring to what is making that more or less powerful in terms of process
Hmm.
uh, entities. In terms of process entities, I would conceptualize energy and I would conceptualize uh, one more entity which we have not yet conceptualized, and that is affinity. I call it affinity. And I'll go into
Hmm.
details of it someday when I do my own model of the mind. But for the moment, suffice to say that not only the archetype concept, the whole of psychology is yet to factor in this very important element of energy. And once it happens, we will see that uh, pathogenesis, the healing process, and the location in the human body
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
certain entities which we at present have no idea in terms of their location. That will get far more clarified. For example, is it possible that all the anger complexes are located somewhere near the Muladhara, the root chakra,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
even if they are located elsewhere, controlled by the root chakra, or some biopsychological mechanism which is near that?
Hmm.
These
Hmm.
are the kind of questions we have to explore out, and it will be possible only once we incorporate the concept of energy into the whole of psychology and including this concept of archetypes.
In fact, that's a very revolutionary idea, which is actually very fundamental to any school. You just discussed this, that how if we talk that energy in form of life energy, then definitely we can connect it with the collective unconscious and conscious energies. Like if a tribe is moving with one idea or one functioning, maybe there are certain archetypes activated there, and when they leave this world it is being taken up by someone else. So how the energy is flowing and that affinity towards that certain thought or ideas and effect, that connects the entire the links are there, it can connect the entire concept of archetype.
On an esoteric level, the
Mm-hmm.
concept of synchronicity can be
Mm-hmm.
explained with the concept of astral cords, which
Mm-hmm.
involves some sort of instantaneous energy or idea transfer in a more esoteric
Right.
way. We can go into
Mm-hmm.
it someday later, but for the moment, we just rest with the statement that we should bring in energy in the discussion on the whole of the mind, including archetypes.
Right. So, sir, when you talked about these different components of energy missing, and then we talked about how the Eastern school and Western schools would differentiate with regard to the components of the formation of archetype in future, how would the Indian approach to the model of the mind engage with the concept of archetype? As we're talking about the Eastern culture is quite influenced with the concepts like energy. So that brings in a lot of interest for Indian approach towards the concept.
Uh, when we talk of Indian model of the mind, we are talking of thousands of years of exploration. So naturally, there is not one, but many models of the mind under the broad heading of Indian model of the mind. But if we take one of the more comprehensive models of the mind, which can either be Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind or the Tantra's model of the mind, which are more comprehensive than the classical yogic model of the mind. So when we take a look at those more comprehensive models of the mind, uh, we see there a model of the mind where you have the uh, soul or the self. You could not possibly go to the extent of soul, but uh, in the Indian model of the mind, there would be a concept of soul, and then there would be a karmic layer, then there would be yin and yang, then there would be a layer of desire, the chakras, and then there would be a layer of the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious just over the self, as we find in Jung's model of the mind, would be different in the Eastern conceptualization. There would be a difference in the model of the mind in terms of where the collective unconscious and the archetypes are placed. Second, there would be a very clear belief in reincarnation. It would not be left as an open question. There would be a very positive and solid belief in reincarnation and influences passing from past lives. So those influences would go into many areas, including the construction of the archetype itself in terms of its strength or in terms of its relative strength versus other archetypes. The third would be there would be open spaces between in the collective unconscious whereby it would be possible for the self to communicate directly with the individual unconscious, and there would be open spaces in the individual unconscious, personal unconscious, to be able to
Hmm.
communicate directly with the conscious. So
All right.
it would not be a concrete layer one over the other. It would be a layer with open spaces. So there would be direct communication possible, bypassing any layer in between. So those would be some of the differences. But the core difference would be the factor of desire. Because the
Hmm.
core in the Indian thinking would be desire leading to uh, attachment and aversion, and that would be the base of most of the psychological operations. So the
Right.
desire and the overcoming of desire would be at the root, in the sense, even if somebody's hero archetype is uh, hyperactive, in the Indian
Hmm.
conceptualization, somebody would say it is the power drive in the Manipur chakra which is overactive, and that is what is making the hero archetype overactive.
Right.
So there would be a more elemental explanation in terms of desire and chakras, which would in turn explain some of the archetypal phenomena. So those would be the differences. Another difference would be a very elaborate consideration of the energy and the energy systems. This energy and the energy systems would be at the heart of the Indian way of looking at the same thing. So the Indian way would look at the energy circulatory system, what constitutes as chakras and nadis and so on. So this whole aspect of energy and energy circulatory system and the regulatory system would be at the center of the Indian way of looking at things. And a separate one more, not separate, but additional way of looking at pathogenesis would be to look at as an energy block. The way acupressure and acupuncture also would look at it, and the way Rolfing
Right.
would also look at it. And that would be a slightly different way of looking at pathology in terms of energy blocks. And then there would be a set of tools and measures how to overcome that energy block. That may be using crystals, it may be pranic healing, it may be Reiki, it may be many other things, but it will definitely bring in another completely different fundamental element into the whole calculation and comprehension of the system.
So as we're talking about the different models of mind, Mr. Vedya, you have developed your own model of mind as well. So that you call it heat in acronym. How does your heat model of the mind engage with this concept of the archetype?
Uh, the heat model of the mind develops by bringing together the models of the mind of East and West and then adding certain things to that collection.
Hmm.
So that model of the mind, uh, there is an explanation of the way archetypes are manufactured and the epistemological process of their manufacture.
Hmm. Hmm.
Secondly, there are open spaces at all levels in the collective unconscious as well as in the personal unconscious. There
Hmm.
is this primacy of desire
Hmm.
and a very important element of the life energy process. And
Right.
the conceptualization in operational terms there is that the activation of desire uh, brings upon the chakra, wherever the desire is activated, some metaphorical entity called the affinity. And this affinity is like a
Agree.
magnet which attracts life energy. So
Right.
more is the affinity, the
Hmm.
more life energy is attracted. And once the life
Hmm.
energy is attracted, then this combination in turn uses the faculties, thought, imagination, action, whatever faculties are necessary to
Right.
take the desire forward. And it also talks about different types of elementals. So it gives a very
Hmm.
elemental description of the psychological process. So it talks
Okay.
about the fundamental elements that constitute the psyche in the constructional sense of the term, even
Hmm.
engineering, civil construction sense of the term. It talks about classification of elementals into motivational elementals, process elementals, the characteristic or facilitating elementals, the resultant
Right.
elementals. So all the psychic elementals, all the psychic variables are classified and then they are put into a functional process. With regard to archetypes, it talks about uh, the manufacturing of archetypes. It talks about activation and deactivation, and it talks about the primacy of desire even over the archetypal activation. In the almost to say, it is the soul journey and the karmic load which creates one particular sets of desires and anxieties, and that in turn activates a lot of entities in the psyche, including the archetypes. And
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
works both from inside and outside. And from outside, when it works, it looks synchronous. So
Right.
this is the way in which the heat model uh, accepts the concept of archetypes, gets into their manufacture, puts primacy on desire, and creates open spaces to bypass the archetypes and still have psychic action straight from something below the archetype to something above the archetype. And behind the archetype are layers of the yin and the yang, the karmic layer and the soul, evolving soul. So this is how my model of the mind deals with the concept of archetype. And I think the strength of the model is not so much in dealing with the archetypes as much it is in dealing with the description in elemental terms of the operation of
Hmm.
the psyche. That I think
Right.
is the
Right.
real strength of that model.
Hmm. That's the key to your model. And that's actually quite Eastern and yet very sturdy model. Mr. Vedya, we talked about archetypes being something like fundamental blocks classification to the life program. So that engages and offers an opportunity to other holistic healing approaches as well, where they can make use of this beautiful concept of archetype. So, how does holistic healing use this concept of the archetype?
Uh, some holistic healing methods use the concept, but I think it is not adequately used. Uh, Techniques of Reiki and pranic healing are not using so much as they should the concept of archetypes. Some techniques of visualization, uh, idol therapy, what normally we call idol worship actually is idol therapy, and some techniques of sort of psychodrama techniques and some techniques of what is called avishkar in tantra. Those techniques use the concept of archetype in different ways. Homeopathy uses it in a very unique way. Not all of homeopathy, but some of it definitely does. They look at the archetypal nature of substances, and those substances, when taken in potentialized form, what psychological and biological differences they do to our human system. And they have found it to be very, very useful in the sense when I look at a flower and it looks irritating to me, can that flower in potentialized form heal irritation in me? Now, this has a lot of aspects. I may find it irritating because it's a subjective reaction. All human beings may not find it irritating. Or even if all human beings find it irritating, all living species on the planet may not find it irritating.
Hmm.
And the counter argument can be that if all human beings or most of us find it irritating, it's enough uh, to, it may be enough for the present that it may be healing things in us, not healing things in others. So all
Hmm.
kinds of arguments are floating around, but there's a very good research by, uh, I forget the name of the person, I think Edward Whitmont or somebody, I don't recollect completely. He has a book called Psyche and Substance. I think Edward Whitmont or something near to that. And he talks about extending the concept of archetypes to non-human entities, plants, minerals, and trees, and so on. And
Hmm.
through that, trying to find some homeopathic drugs and explain why those drugs should be behaving in a particular way. Now, this takes the concept of archetype to outside of human realm. And this is something that Jung also tried to do along with, I think it was Wolfgang Pauli or somebody, some famous
Hmm.
physicist, uh, Planck or Pauli, I don't recollect who it was, but some well-known physicist and Jung tried to take this concept of archetype even outside of the human realm. And in homeopathy, now I see the same thing being done in a slightly different way, but generically along the same lines. So I think the concept of archetypes can be taken out in holistic healing far more than it is done at present. And I'm sure as we go along and we experiment more with it, we will find more of it. I also hear that in certain practices of the healing process designed by Stanislav Graf and in certain hallucinogenic experiences, the
Hmm.
archetypes in the archetypal phenomena, they come out very naturally. So there is
Hmm.
a complete area of healing with hallucinogens or healing with uh, substances which are not conventionally regarded as safe substances and often classified as addictive drugs. But there is a branch of healing which is now experimenting with hallucinogenic substances. And uh, hallucinogenic substances have been used for hundreds of years by shamans in various tribal cultures to heal people. And many of the healing procedures, they involve an encounter with archetypal material. So there might be some use of this concept of archetype in healing using those hallucinogenic substances, and it might find more use in understanding homeopathy and in understanding finding new drugs and how they operate. And is there some sort of a systematic logic at work between substances and the human system in terms of causation of difficulties or healing? So that concept of archetype, I think, is traveling slowly. It can travel at a greater speed, but surely traveling to other areas. We don't know what the outcome of these explorations will be, but into themselves, the explorations are very interesting.
Indeed, they are very interesting. And how do you see the concept and action around it in evolving in future? Because this sounds very, very primitive. And how do the modern concept would relate with it for the in the future?
Yeah, we are talking about the future of the past, and the future of the past seems very promising. Uh, the first, I think, the action will be around definition. Second will be empirical
Mm,
validation. Third will be
mhm,
the role in the structure, the model of the mind. Fourth will be in pathogenesis, and fifth will be healing. And more importantly, the tools which can be developed around this concept for healing. And that may not be appropriated so much by psychoanalysis or Western psychotherapy. It will go more into holistic healing area. But I'm sure
right.
over a period of time, uh, we will get an insight into manufacturing of these archetypes, more reliable ways of getting in touch with this material inside of us, and even more resourceful area will be generating tools and techniques to use this concept for healing us from a variety of ways. It may be from the energy healing perspective, it may be from a cognitive healing perspective, it may be from the classical catharsis perspective, where you can blend these things into a affect release technique, be it emotion centered therapy or ISTDP or something, but essentially into some affect release technique. Or we can use it in conjunction with the energy healing techniques, or put all of this together into a holistic healing package for an individual.
Very beautifully stepwise explained the application of archetypes in the future context. Um, uh, Talking to an individual on a one-on-one healing purpose, or for a job description suitable profile for a person, or matchmaking. There are a lot many social applications involved in this beautiful concept of archetype, basically to get the max of quality of life for an individual, and as used by Jung often, like collective unconscious. I would say it would be an individual to collective mankind wellness and harmony. Thank you so much, Mr. Vedya, for sharing your profound knowledge and sharing your time with us today here. Namaste. We have discussed today an enigmatic, deep, and difficult to understand concept of archetype. Do write us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.